In June 2006, workers were digging up old underground fuel tanks at a gas station in Sutherland, a neighborhood in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. The gas station had been built many years earlier, but before that, other buildings had stood on the same land. While the workers were excavating, they came across something shocking. They found skeletal remains buried deep underground. The discovery stopped the construction work immediately. The Saskatoon Police Service was called to the scene, and investigators began to look into what had happened. It was clear from the beginning that these were human remains, but who the person was and how they ended up there was a complete mystery. The bones were very old, and it was not immediately obvious how long they had been there or what might have caused the person's death. The police collected everything they could find from the site, carefully preserving the bones and any other items buried nearby. Alongside the remains, they discovered pieces of clothing and some personal items that gave them their first clues. What they found would slowly help them build a picture of the life and mysterious death of the person who had been buried there. Among the items found were clothing fragments, a fitted jacket, a high-collared blouse, and a long skirt. These pieces of clothing were old-fashioned and didn't look like anything people would have worn in recent decades. The police brought in a clothing and textile historian, someone who specializes in identifying how old garments are based on the materials, stitching, and style. The historian studied the clothing and concluded that the woman's outfit came from around 1910 to 1920, over 100 years earlier. This meant that the remains probably belonged to someone who had lived and died in the early 1900s. Next to the clothing, the investigators found a broken gold necklace and some men's clothing, a vest, and a pair of trousers. These items might have belonged to the woman or to someone else who was involved in her death. The broken necklace, in particular, raised suspicions that something violent might have happened. From the position of the bones and the other evidence at the site, police concluded that the woman's body had been placed inside a burlap sack and then stuffed into a wooden barrel. The barrel had been dropped into an old well that once belonged to the Shore Hotel, a building that had stood on the property long before the gas station was built. The location where the remains were found had a long and interesting history. Back in the early 1900s, before Saskatoon grew into a large city, Sutherland was a small but busy railroad town. The Shore Hotel was a boarding house, a place where travelers and local workers could rent a room, eat meals, and socialize. It was known to have a mixed reputation. Some people saw it as a decent place to stay, while others considered it a rough spot where trouble sometimes happened. In 1927, the Shore Hotel was demolished, and eventually a gas station was built on the same land. That gas station operated for many years, and later, when the old fuel tanks were being removed in 2006, the workers made their surprising discovery. Because of the hotel's reputation and the way the woman's body had been hidden, police suspected that she had been murdered and secretly disposed of in the hotel's well. It seemed likely that whoever killed her wanted to make sure she would never be found. The Saskatoon police called in experts to learn as much as possible about the woman. A forensic archaeologist from the University of Saskatchewan examined her bones and other remains. From this analysis, the expert determined that the woman had been white, between 25 and 35 years old, and around 5 feet 1 inch tall. Her hair was light brown to reddish, and she had a prominent nose. The archaeologist also noted that the woman had dental work that was unusual for the time period. It suggested that she had access to a dentist and could afford care that poorer people could not. Combined with her stylish clothing and gold jewelry, investigators concluded that she was probably middle class or higher in social status. From the way the body was found, police believed the woman had been partially dismembered before being placed in the barrel. This would explain how she fit inside, and hinted that whoever had done this had gone to great lengths to hide her body. It was a gruesome discovery that made the case even more disturbing. Although the evidence told investigators a lot about the woman's age, background, and the time period she lived in, it didn't reveal her name or what exactly had happened to her. The Saskatoon police began a long search to identify her. They developed a DNA profile from her remains, using short tandem repeat (STR) DNA testing, a common forensic method. Unfortunately, when they entered the profile into DNA databases, no matches came up. There was no known missing person who fit her description, and no family members in the system who could be linked to her. To keep the case alive, the police created 2 facial reconstructions based on the shape of her skull. These images showed what the woman might have looked like when she was alive. They released the images to the public, hoping someone might recognize her from old family photos or stories passed down through generations. The media covered the story, and police received about 30 calls from people across Canada and even from France. Many of these people wondered if the mystery woman could have been a missing mother, grandmother, or great-aunt from their own family histories. However, after checking each lead carefully, none of them matched. The woman remained unidentified, and over time, people began to refer to her as the woman in the well. For nearly 2 decades after her discovery, the woman in the well remained a mystery. Detectives, scientists, and volunteers kept returning to the evidence, hoping that advances in technology would eventually help them learn who she was. By the early 2020s, new methods of DNA analysis and forensic genealogy had become powerful tools for solving old cases. These techniques had already helped solve dozens of decades-old mysteries and cold cases around the world. Saskatoon police decided it was time to try again, this time using the most advanced methods available. In 2023, the Saskatoon police sent the woman's DNA evidence to Othram, a private forensic lab in the Woodlands, Texas, known for solving cases using forensic-grade genome sequencing. Othram specializes in extracting and sequencing DNA even from very old or damaged remains, which made them perfect for this over 100-year-old case. Othram's scientists carefully processed the bones and successfully created a comprehensive DNA profile of the unknown woman. This profile contained far more genetic information than older tests could produce. Using this data, Othram's forensic genetic genealogy team began searching through public and private databases to find people who shared DNA with the unknown woman. Through these searches, they began to identify possible relatives, distant cousins, or descendants of the woman's extended family. These leads were passed back to the Saskatoon police, who then worked with forensic genealogists from the Toronto Police Service to investigate further. The genealogists built detailed family trees based on the DNA matches and historical records such as birth certificates, census lists, and marriage documents. Eventually, they were able to narrow down the possibilities and locate living relatives who might be directly connected to the mystery woman. Once potential relatives were found, the police contacted them and asked for reference DNA samples. These samples were compared to the unknown woman's DNA to confirm the relationship. Finally, after more than a century of mystery, the results came back. The woman in the well was identified as Alice Spence, who had been born Alice Burke in September 1881. Alice's story began in the United States. She was born in St. Louis, Minnesota, and later married a man named Charles Spence. The couple had a young daughter named Idella, and in 1913 they moved to Sutherland, Saskatchewan, which was at that time a growing railroad town near Saskatoon. Historical records show that Alice, Charles, and Idella were living together in Sutherland during the 1916 census. This is the last record of Alice being alive. 2 years later, in 1918, there was a fire that destroyed the Spence family's home. After that, in the 1921 census, Charles was listed as living with his daughter, a housekeeper, and the housekeeper's son. But Alice was gone. Based on these records, police believe that Alice was killed sometime between 1916 and 1918, likely before or around the time of the house fire. The circumstances of her death remain unclear, but given the way her body was hidden, investigators are certain that foul play occurred. It's possible that Alice's killer, perhaps someone close to her, hid her body in the well behind the Shore Hotel, knowing it would be a perfect place to conceal a crime. The hotel's rough reputation and the busy nature of the town at that time might have made it easy for such a thing to go unnoticed. Over time, the hotel was torn down, the well was covered, and a gas station was built right on top, hiding Alice's secret for nearly 90 years. Thanks to the DNA evidence, forensic genealogists were able to trace Alice's family line down to the present day. They found living descendants, people who were related to Alice through her daughter or other branches of her extended family. Many of these descendants had no idea that Alice had ever gone missing or died under mysterious circumstances. For them, the identification was both shocking and emotional. It connected them to a piece of family history that had been lost for more than a century. Although police may never be able to find out exactly who killed Alice or why, identifying her brought closure to one of the oldest cold cases in Canada. It also showed how powerful modern science can be when combined with good detective work and persistence. The story of Alice Spence, the woman in the well, is now seen as an important example of how forensic genetic genealogy can help solve historical mysteries. Her case stretched across more than 100 years and involved several generations of investigators, scientists, and family members. Alice's identification gave her back her name and dignity, which had been lost for so long. It also reminded people that even in very old cases, justice and truth can still be found through the dedication of those who refuse to give up. For the Saskatoon police, solving Alice's case was the result of years of hard work and cooperation between local, national, and international experts. For Othram and the genealogists who worked on the case, it was another proof that every person leaves behind a genetic story, waiting to be discovered. Today, Alice's story is shared to inspire hope for other cold cases, and to show that, even after a century, the past can still speak through science. In simple terms, a woman's body was found in a well in 2006 under an old gas station in Saskatoon, Canada. Investigators discovered that she had been killed around 1916 to 1918 and hidden in a barrel. For many years, no one knew who she was. Then, with the help of advanced DNA testing and genealogy, scientists finally identified her in 2023 as Alice Spence, a woman who had moved to Sutherland in 1913 and mysteriously disappeared. After more than 100 years, Alice's story was finally told. Thanks to the determination of investigators, the power of modern science, and the connections written in her DNA.